name is Lenore Chinn. I'm a local artist, born and raised in San Francisco, and I'm involved with the film that's about to screen at the De Young Museum called The Worlds of Bernice Bing. And I got involved in this project because of my relationship with the Bernice Bing estate and many of the friends who are involved in the film project as interviewees or the filmmaker are all tied in together. I got involved with some of the early archival work after Bing, otherwise known as Bingo, died. She died in 1998. And there was a core group of us who have been involved with projects designed to establish her legacy as an artist in the Bay Area and nationally. She was very well known in her early days, I would say the late 50s, early 60s, because she had graduated from the California School of Fine Arts and was part of a lot of programs that got its start in the Bay Area very, very early on. So we want to tell her story. In the documentary, it's a 34-minute film. It covers some of her history as a child. She lost her parents at an early age, and she ended up going through quite a few foster homes. She spent some time in the Mingguang orphanage for young children. I think they were mostly little girls. And it follows that through her development as an artist. She got a scholarship to go to the, I believe it's the California School of Fine Arts. She also went for a brief time to what was then known as California, what was it? It was the CCAC, it was referred to. Now they shortened the title to California College of the Arts. That was brief. And then she went to the Art Institute, which still exists over on Chestnut Street. And then it goes through her early development as a professional artist. She lived in a number of places in San Francisco, and largely in the North Beach, Chinatown area. Her family at one time had a residence there, but she also lived in the Sunset District for a time, a couple of years. Toward the end of her term as the first executive director of the South of Market Cultural Center, which is now known as SOMARTS, that still exists, and she was part of the founding of that institution. I would say that sometime around the early 80s, I understand from Alexa Young, who is the executive director of the Bing Estate. She lived in the Sunset for a couple of years. She moved into a storefront in March of 1982. And it was primarily a transitional period for her. She was sort of trying to wind down as the administrator at the South Market Cultural Center because it really took away from her time creating her own art. So she found this storefront, and it served as both her studio space to get back into her own art making. And she lived there. Apparently, the front part, which was a storefront, was where she did her art. And she also kept it up as a little alternative, what you would call today a pop-up gallery. And a number of her friends, most notably, I think, Leo Valador, who was a Bay Area painter, showed there with her. They created works on paper and exhibited there. And her own living quarters was in the back, and then behind that there was a garden. So I understand that was on the first floor. And I think if you go to the area now or Google it, it's a little Chinese grocery store. And that was like 30 years ago that she lived there, something like that. And during that time, she was trying to figure out where she wanted to go next, how she was going to transition out of the hectic and chaotic life of trying to run an arts cultural center. and get back to her own work. So during that time is when she made plans to go to China for a few months. And she left the Bay Area and went to China in 1984, and where she studied calligraphy. I think she might have taught a little art while she was over there. And then when she came back to the Bay Area, that's when she decided that she was going to go find a place in the country to live. She had been kind of going back and forth there for a period of time. She worked up in the Mayacamas vineyards. And when she came home to San Francisco, she started making plans to move up to the Anderson Valley. And she chose Philo, a little rural town up that way. I think it's on the edge of Mendocino County. And there she stayed for the rest of her life.
Now, what is your connection to her? When did you first meet her?
I probably met her in the last 8 to 10 years of her life. And the main area where we would gather is through the Asian American Women Artists Association, which is producing this film. She was living in Philo by that time, but she would make the 3-hour ride down windy roads to get to the city to come to our meetings. And I would see her around town at cultural events, but where I really got to know her was when we were involved in exhibits and things relating to the AWA, as we call it. And so that's how I kind of got to know her.
And what were you working on at the time, or what did you
I was a painter. I'm still a painter. I was an exhibiting artist, and we would also go to each other's art exhibits. One of the ones that I attended with her, which there's a little color, an old color Polaroid snapshot, shows me with her and a couple of other friends in one of her last little shows sponsored by a group called Gallery on the Rim. In her later years, she would, periodically get into group shows and things. And so those of us who were able to go to those things would, gather for those kinds of events and celebrate our exhibits.
Do you have any particular memories about her that you'd like to share with us?
Well, in her later years, when she was able to come down to the Bay Area, we enjoyed, going to, in addition to art events, one time we went to Mills College to hear a panel discussion. There was a selection of a variety of visual artists, Asian American women. I think Moira Roth, who's the professor of art at Mills College and still is there, organized an event, and Bingo and I were sitting up in the, top part of the auditorium listening, and there was a young, I think she is a Vietnamese mixed media installation artist, and also a lesbian. She was presenting some of her work, which some of the younger members of the audience found for them a little outrageous. And I remember Bingo and I, just sort of let out a laughter because, I think we were the only ones that kind of understood Hunty Phom's work. And when we laughed and Bingo let out a loud guffaw, I think she was a little embarrassed because she realized, I'm sort of in an academic environment. She kind of lived a fragmented life. Her lesbian friends were, one circle of friends, and other art friends were in another area, and then the people that she moved in with in the academic world were, they were all kind of separate. So she kind of kept certain aspects of her life very private, and those of us who kind of moved in similar circles with her were aware of these different worlds that she moved in, which is part of what's going to be unveiled in the documentary film.
Talk about that aspect, the queer and lesbian community and her work, and how that's influenced, and the connection to being Asian American in that community.
Well, like I said, a lot of that was separate. when I first saw her, a lot of times it might have been at a cultural event that was hosted by lesbian artists. I was involved with a group called Lesbian Visual Artists. It no longer exists, but through that group, we also had mutual friends, and I would sometimes I would see her at these events, or I saw her give a talk. She was not out as a lesbian in those days, and so I would see her in that context, and then I would see her in art contexts where her sexual orientation was not known. So they didn't really intersect publicly. She was very private about that, and I think that was partly due to her generation, and perhaps her upbringing in terms of keeping her art separated from her personal life, that kind of thing. So, I think for her, I think she found it kind of tricky to navigate. So certain aspects she would be kind of quiet about, and others, she would be more public. And it was her art that was more public, that she was willing to talk about her art. But in her day, she didn't necessarily even identify as an Asian American artist. Today, it might be a little different. So she was kind of bracketed, I think, by different kinds of mores or cultural expectations. When she was much younger, she actually got quite a bit of positive art reviews from very well-known local writers and critics. Thomas Albright, who used to have a regular column with, I think it was the Chronicle, thought highly of her and wrote her up in a few articles and included her in a book that he wrote on Bay Area figurative artists. Some of her early work included figurative painting and line drawings and things like that. But her teaching, actually, what she was taught when she went to the what we know as the Art Institute, was abstract expressionism. So, I think she was trying to figure out how to, develop that as her visual language. And then I think later, as she began to explore her own cultural roots, largely by going to China, then she began to integrate, the abstract expressionism that she sort of grew up with as a student, and fusing that with the calligraphy that she learned while she was in China. Because having been brought up largely in white middle class homes, she was a bit cut off from our Asian cultural heritage. And so I think in her explorations, she was really trying to seek her identity and figure out who she was. And some of that, I think, is apparent in the way her art developed. If you look at her work now, her later work, and that's actually, I would say mid-90s or so, you can see the influence of the calligraphy that she was experimenting with. And I think for those who have an understanding of Asian and Chinese art, I think you may see traces of that kind of influence in that later work. It was, it was a fusion of Western and Eastern imagery, but using an abstract way of presenting her developing palette, and that's that was what came toward the end of her life.
Now, you were with her in those last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about some of the things that you two may have worked on together, or anything that you felt like you helped influence, or anything like that.
I'm not so sure that it was that I influenced her, as I found that she was a mentor. She may not have realized that. I think she was so busy, doing the things that she was trying to do to develop her own art. I don't think she realized the impact that she had on a group of us who, the ones that are the most supportive of, ensuring that her contributions to the cultural landscape are don't disappear completely. I think I found her inspiring as a model because she was so passionate about her work. Um, and I think in a lot of ways, she sacrificed a lot of uh, with her choices to continue with her art and everything. She never made much money off her art, and she took on a lot of odd jobs, as many of us have, in order to survive as an artist. And I found that inspiring because it's so difficult. I know a lot of artists who, give up on developing their own art because it's just too difficult to survive that way. So they take jobs that really take them away from their own art, and that did happen to her too. But somehow she found a way to balance that out. And I admired her for her passion and commitment to her art. She was unwavering in that respect, and yet she still also had a passion and commitment to supporting the community arts programs and nurturing people along. She was known to be part of a group of people that helped at-risk youth. In the documentary, Flo Oi Wong, another mutual friend of ours, talks a little bit about that when gangs were running around in Chinatown, and Bingo was part of the neighborhood arts programs, and she was able to encourage some of these young people to essentially give up their guns and start a training as artists and focusing on less violent activities and things like that. So I found that very inspiring because it's not an easy task to take on.
Um, in the documentary, who are some of the other people that are interviewed or talk about her?
Floy Wong, who is a mixed media installation artist. She was a very close friend of hers. Nancy Hom, who is a local artist and had been involved for many, many years with Kearney Street Workshop. She was one of the early members and was its executive director for quite a few years. She was interviewed. Alexa Young, who is the executor to the Bernice Bing estate and probably was one of the ones that knew her the longest of those who are still around now. She actually knew her from her Chinatown North Beach era. They spent a lot of time at the old spaghetti factory where Bingo had a studio upstairs in the rafters, and actually had visited her when she had her little spot in the Sunset and had that little alternative gallery. They called it the 1322 Noriega Street Gallery after the address. Let's see, Frida Weinstein, who was a good friend of hers, speaks, and another longtime friend, Jenny Strip, is also interviewed, as well as Jen Banta, who is the project director for the film, because when she learned of Bingo's history, sort of inadvertently, she was working down at SOMARS, the former South Market Cultural Center, and she saw a painting that was stored there and inquired, and ultimately it led to her doing her master's thesis some 10 years ago. And so that sort of, raised the profile a little bit further because it allowed us to, talk a little bit more about her. A symposium was held. We had also, some of us had gotten a piece into the De Young Museum. They have an early work of Bingo's in their permanent collection. It was titled Mayacamas No.6, and it was done in 1963. And so there was about, quite a few people. I can't name them all right now without referencing my notes, but there were over half a dozen people involved with being interviewed for the film project. People who knew her. Um, some of Bob Shang's photos, early black and white photos of her from the 90s, is included to give some context. And he's a local photographer. So, in a sense, we included a lot of our Asian American artist friends to tell the story because we were the closest to her and knew her history. State. I met Bernice being much later when our activities uh, sort of intersected through our art. I had moved to the Castro in the early 80s, around the time that she was leaving the Sunset to move up to the country. But we would get together for, AWA exhibits and planning, and we would have meetings. Originally, we would have meetings in Oakland, Chinatown. Without her realizing it, she kind of showed what is possible because, for a lot of artists, we don't get business skills in art school. And I think that that's really unfortunate because these kids get out of art school, they have their portfolio, and they're not really sure how to navigate the cultural terrain, how to get the work out there and things like that. But, I think it was for me and for many of us in AWA who were a little younger, it was leading by example. And she was so entrenched in working with these various art organizations that I think we picked up a lot of, tips, insight on how you deal with organizations. That you learn how to do things on your own, essentially. How to put exhibits together and all of that. From the ground up. You can't wait for somebody to come by and teach you those things necessarily. So, you kind of, you learn as you go along. And by being involved in a lot of these exhibits and things, you just sort of absorb things. And I think for many of us, that's what she did. She showed that things are possible. It's not something you necessarily learn when you're actually going to art school, but you pick it up because, you hang out with people who, you think they know what they're doing, or they've been through it. You see how they put shows together and that kind of a thing. I think that's the only thing I can say about that, what she passed on to us.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's her lasting?
I think that's part of her lasting legacy. Because for a long time when she wasn't able to do her own work because she was busy, helping everybody with their arts organizations or whatever, that's what she was known more for. She was known for her community activities, working in Chinatown and helping get money for, various arts programs and things like that. And I think her own art sort of took a back seat to all of that. And maybe people weren't always aware of the fact that she actually was, an artist in her own right, unless you, were somewhat close to her. So there were gaps in her exhibition history. But toward the end of her life, she had a sort of cadre of friends who were involved in the art and were able to help her get work out there. She showed in a group show at Rutgers University. She was honored by the Women's Caucus for Art some years ago for her contributions. And unfortunately, she was not in good health, especially toward the end. She had lupus, and it really took its toll on, her ability to keep going. But she kept painting as long as she could.
So people see her now today more as an icon, more as
in a way, yeah, because there were so few from that era and earlier. I mean, the most recent one, of course, is Ruth Asawa, who just passed. Fortunately, she enjoyed the recognition that she deserved, and she was another one who, gave a lot of years to helping other people with community arts programs, and she helped found School of the Arts, and so in a way, they had, and I think they actually knew each other. Although Bingo was a little younger, they had a similar commitment. And I think that's what some of us really appreciated, that they were really good as artists, but they also didn't hold back on sharing what they knew and helping others, along and helping them seek their own path. Um, and so I think for us, Bing and Ruth Asawa and a handful of others, they were our pioneers. They kind of led the way.
And what do you think people will take away from watching this documentary?
Well, I hope that it will continue to inspire people of all ages about what they can do and how art is defined, and her resilience in spite of her difficulties growing up, I think is a model that people can see. It is possible to become an artist if that's your passion, and that there's all kinds of ways to get your work out there, and that you learn to form your arts communities and seek your own way of defining your art and getting it out there. And that essentially you learn that you have to have a thick skin for one. And I think that in spite of people who might have said, oh, you can't do this, or that's not the way you should be doing it, or gee, this is too difficult, or whatever, I think the story shows that it is possible to carve out a life for yourself as an artist. Hopefully, it won't be quite as difficult for those who are emerging as it was for Bernice and her generation. But we want to encourage people that it is possible, and there's much to be learned from our elder communities in that regard. So. I hope it touches a lot of people in different areas, community arts, the fine arts, helping open up the idea of what fine arts is all about, and that kind of a thing. I think it's going to be an exciting film.